Hi guys, I've seen a lot of videos recently and some quite heated discussion on the subject of agnosticism and agnostics. And my initial thoughts on this, and still my thoughts, is that this is getting way more attention than it actually deserves. After all, we're not discussing what people believe, why they believe it, what could change their mind. All we're talking about, like a room full of overzealous taxonomists with too much time on our hands, is the label that we're going to apply to people, or the label that we're going to allow people to apply to themselves. But there are some important points in some of this, so perhaps, if nothing else, as an exercise in gross hypocrisy, I'm going to join in with the debate and make a video of my own, which is what I'm doing now, obviously. So I'm going to stage this video in several sections. What I want to look at, these are the sections I've written down somewhere. I want to look at the issues that people have. I want to look at the way that we define things. I want to give my viewpoint on the way that agnosticism perhaps is best defined, or the word is best utilised, and then finally, just to wrap up, an interesting perhaps experiment that I would like to see. So they're going to be the sections. Let's get on with it. Okay, so right off the bat, let me say, and I want to try and keep this section brief, I do understand some of the practical, real-life issues people have with the label, especially if you live somewhere like in the United States, it would seem, where there is some stigma attached to calling yourself an atheist. And it is quite likely, in fact it is certain, that a lot of people who call themselves agnostic aren't doing that because they necessarily think that it is the most appropriate label for them, but they're using that label perhaps as a shroud, rather than using the term atheist, which would perhaps better define what they actually believe. So this, I think, stands apart from any discussions, technical discussions we could have on definition, or any real pragmatic discussions we could have on how to best utilise the word agnostic within the scope of how it's already utilised, of course, because that's the only way that you can do such things, but how best to use that word. But yes, this is a real issue. I accept that, and I can accept people's frustration when they speak to people who believe things that are no different, that practically rule out every possibility of any kind of a deity, but still regard themselves as an agnostic. If it was any other question in any other sphere, they would be prepared to commit themselves. But simply due to the nature of this debate, and due to the nature of the strength of feeling of some of the people in their communities, they insist on using this term, agnostic. Okay, fair enough, I understand that, but let's move on from that. So a lot of talk in this debate is centred around how we should actually define, or how we must define, the word agnostic. I've been quite interested, quite amused that people have been very quick to go into their dictionary and look up what the dictionary has to say on atheism and theism, and thereby define agnosticism. But a lot more reticent to go into the dictionary and actually look at the word agnosticism, which seems rather strange. If you're interested in what the dictionary has to say, then surely the most relevant dictionary entry should be the entry on agnosticism itself, not on the entries to some terms which obviously are pertinent to the definition of agnosticism, but isn't the definition of agnosticism itself. It does turn out that sometimes words can be slightly contradictory in the way that they are defined, but that's just the nature of the way words come to be defined in our society. You see, so much of this discussion seems to have hung upon the kind of origin of the word. You know, if we can work out the origin of the word from the Greek, we looked at the words, the Greek word gnosis, and that means knowledge, and that we're going to start defining it from that. But Words aren't actually defined like that. If you open up your Oxford English Dictionary, if you have the full 20-volume, magnus opus of the whole thing, you'll find that words just aren't defined in that way. Yes, it will give you the word origin, but that isn't how we define words today. Looking at Greek words, lesbian means something coming from the Greek island of Lesbos. But if you say that you're a lesbian today, nobody's going to be pedantic and pick you up in that kind of fashion. It's usage that defines words. If you pick up your OED, what you will find is time and again examples of usage throughout history, and it's the usage of the word that defines the word, whether you like it or not. It's tough shit, I hear people keep talking, and it bugs the crap out of me about wanting to lose fat. It isn't lose fat, it's lose fat. But I'm afraid that this is an argument that eventually I am going to end up losing, or perhaps loosing, because if enough people keep saying it, that will become part of the definition of the word loose, will be the definition of the word lose. So it will be something that I'll end up losing simply by dint of common usage. And it's the same thing with agnosticism. You simply cannot have a discussion on the definition of the word agnosticism without looking at how the word is commonly used. That being said, I now want to move on to how I believe the word should be used. This whole debate about how the word should be used is one that's really kind of surprising to me. I'd heard the debate before from the other end. Time and again over the years I've heard people of a strong religious position say that if an atheist has any doubt whatsoever, then they're not really an atheist, they're actually an agnostic. And that's always been a position I've always railed against, on the grounds that there are many theists who admit to some doubt in what they believe, that they could be wrong, and yet we don't all label those atheists. And that was the only real argument I'd ever come across on this. So this is quite a new one for me, albeit the second time of hearing, because I know pretty much this whole debate took place a few months ago. So where I want to get my hooks into this is about the same period a few months ago, another discussion that was going on was, are babies atheists? And I came down on the side, it's not a big issue to me really either way, but I came down on the side that babies are atheists, because the default position is atheism. That babies, they're kind of the ultimate agnostics because they lack knowledge even in the proposition itself. So there's no way that they can have any kind of a belief in a deity. So that was a default position, and I accept that atheism is the default position. That does make sense to me. I can understand, given the definition of atheism relative to theism. Okay, fine. But when you talk about adults who have been presented with some information of either side, who've been presented with the proposition, and who have actively made a choice, then the choice to disbelieve in gods is just as much of an active choice as a choice to believe. There isn't a default position anymore. It's like you've crossed some kind of epistemic Rubicon at that point, and that any positive decision you make is just as much of a decision as any other. And there is clearly a difference, a qualitative difference between somebody who says, right, you've presented me with the proposition, and I don't think you've given me enough to go on, go away, and somebody who says, you've presented me with a proposition and I'm rejecting it. I want to give another example to flesh this out. Somebody, I think a user called Pink Program, talked about a binary proposition. I like that term. In the comments section, I've got that Funks video on this. And so here's a binary proposition, then the ultimate binary proposition. I'm going to toss a coin. Don't get excited, I'm not going to toss it now. I'm going to toss the coin tomorrow. So don't get your hopes up, you're not going to see some coin tossing action. But so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go out and I'm going to ask 100 people whether they think it's going to land heads or tails. And just to make it absolutely a binary proposition, I'm going to toss it on an infinite sized table with a good stiff wind, so there's no way it can land on its edge. So just to make that absolutely clear there. So the point I'm trying to make is that just because something's a binary proposition doesn't mean there's only two legitimate answers that you can give. I would suggest that if I now go and ask 100 people, maybe 45 of those people will say, I'm asking them, how do you think the coin's going to land? Maybe 45 of those people will say heads. 45 of those people will say tails, and the other 10 people will say, well, I don't know, it could land either side. Now, are we denying that that third answer is a legitimate answer? I don't think so. In fact, I think it's an answer maybe most of us would just play along and say heads or tails. But I think when we think about it, most of us realise that that is actually the most legitimate answer that you could give. It's an absurd question. How can you possibly know? It's a 50-50 chance, for God's sake. How can you possibly know whether it's going to land heads or going to land tails? Now, clearly then, to define the people who say I don't know as headsists or tailsists is absolutely ridiculous. They need a third category of their own, even though it's a binary proposition that we're dealing with. Of course, here we're defining a headsist as somebody who chooses heads, a tailsist as somebody who chooses tails. But let's make it more like the theism thing by saying a headsist is somebody who chooses heads, and a tailsist is somebody who doesn't choose heads. So maybe now you could make a case that these I don't knows, well, they're tailsists because they haven't actively plumped for heads. And maybe you could do that, and maybe you could score some kind of technical victory against me, but really all you've done is scored what amounts to a Pyrrhic victory on some kind of intellectual technicality, because what you've now done is you've bundled two groups of people that were qualitatively oceans apart there together in one definition. The people who actively chose tails are a very different group of people to the people who said, do you know what, I just don't know, it could be either. So what have we gained by submerging this group of people into this other group of people? Have we made it clearer what everybody believes? I don't think we have at all. We've gained nothing. On a pragmatic level, it would be a really, really poor way of labelling this group of people to call them tailsists. And this is exactly the same point I'm making with agnostics, regardless of the word origins, regardless almost of the etymology of the word over the ages. It seems to me that if we're going to use the word, it needs to have some kind of practical use. And in fact, in the way that most people use it, other than the people who are hiding behind it, who are really atheists, the way most people use the word is to show that they genuinely do not know. They're not the Richard Dawkins, the atheist, who says, well, I accept the 0.0001% chance that there could be a God, or the Archbishop of Canterbury at the other end of the scale, who says, yeah, he admits there's a possibility that he could be wrong and God might not exist. Now, clearly that would be ridiculous to label them as agnostics, but when you've got somebody really genuinely holding that middle ground, does it make any sense to label them at one end or the other? I don't think that it does, and I think using the term atheist to apply to people like that, we lose something by doing that. Okay, that's my theory on that. I'm happy with the term agnostics for people who say, I don't know, do I believe in God? Don't I believe in God? I don't know. Finally then, I just want to move on to what I think would be a little experiment, an interesting experiment. Okay, so I'll keep this bit brief because I know I've bored the shit out of you long enough, I'm quite certain. What I'd like to see, I'd like to test the hypothesis that I have, which is that the distribution of people that call themselves agnostics is highly asymmetrical. So really, I'd like to get a great big group of people, 1,000 randomly selected people, and ask them two questions and change the order of the two questions, maybe 500 with each order. And one of the questions would be, how do they self-identify? Do they identify within one of these religious categories, or as an agnostic, or as an atheist? And then the second category would be to ask them what percentage chance do they think there is that a God exists does not exist. So then you'd have like 100 to 0, 90 to 10, 80 to 20, all the way down to 0 to 100. 100% chance that no God exists. And see which box they ticked and see how that correlates with a category. My hypothesis is that how they will answer will be something along the lines of those who think there's an 80% chance that God exists will identify with a religious position. That won't be enough for them to qualify themselves as an agnostic. Whereas those that think, well, there's a 20% chance that God exists and 80% chance that he doesn't, often won't call themselves atheists. They'll say, well, no, I've got some doubt, so I'm an agnostic. The whole balance of agnosticism is actually, rather than being, let me get in the middle of the camera, rather than being central, like the central wedge of that, is actually shifted over something like that, maybe towards the atheist side. Okay, that's it. I told you that bit would be boring. Thank you for watching this video. Bye for now. Quick blooper on the end. Hit my little finger. A baby is entirely atheistic. It's certainly... Ow, my finger. Ow, I've hurt my finger. Oh, my fucking finger's hurting now.